No.
Action. All right, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the winter seminar for the Grand Strand chapter of the South Carolina Native Plant Society. So this is our second year doing a winter seminar. It's a good time when there aren't a lot of plants growing to do a deeper dive, a longer presentation. So I'm really excited for our seminar tonight. My name is Maeve Snyder. I'm the education chair for the Grand Strand chapter. And I am going to give a few quick announcements before I introduce our speaker, Celie Dailey. I guess the first update that I should share is that unfortunately there were some unavoidable circumstances, and Celie, who had hoped to be here tonight, is joining us on Zoom, but we are all really glad that you are here in person. It's never a bad night when we get to hang out with native plant friends. And for everyone joining on Zoom, you are missing out on cookies. So, do you want to go to our next slide? So I want to recognize our co-host for our seminar tonight, the Coastal Carolina Arboretum, and I'm going to let Dominique give a little intro to the Arboretum. We need to back up to that. Yeah.
Thanks, Maeve. Hi, everybody. So nice to see a lot of familiar faces in here in the room. So I wanted to share some updates about the Arboretum. I'll start at the very beginning for those of you who don't know the story, though I know many of you here do, and then share our latest successes and the outlook coming up. It's been a really amazing year, and we have an exciting year ahead. All right, so the Arboretum started as an idea by a group of students several years ago in 2019. Their focus was on a little corner of campus, 1.5 acres. They wanted to protect the trees there, and they thought, let's turn it into an arboretum to make sure that none of these trees can get cut down as this campus continues to grow. And you know, we have to always add buildings and parking lots to accommodate them. So they saw this space, which is near our Wheelwright Auditorium, for those of you familiar with campus. And that kicked off a whole series of events. Through that fall, I worked with those students to develop a proposal. They wrote a magazine linking this idea to the Sustainable Development Goals. They gave a presentation, which might have been actually in this very room, come to think of it, to the university president, the chief financial officer, and some other very important folks on campus, making their pitch about why we should do this on campus. And what was amazing is that very day, the president approved it. Very exciting. So fast forward, we're gonna go back in time for a second on the next slide. So the area has always been this kind of random stand of trees. The way campus is oriented now is it's right at the main entrance when folks enter campus. It's right across from Baxley Hall, which is kind of our welcome center. So you can see in old student newspapers in the Chanticleer, students have randomly hung out in there. There was a nailed sign on a tree that said Singleton Swamp at one point in the 70s. Looks like they had a snowstorm back then too. They were actually ice skating on a puddle. And then before we did the project, it looked like this. Some puddles of standing water and just an unkempt area. So once we had the president's approval, we went ahead and transformed it a bit. We added some pathways for folks to explore the space. We added signage on every tree. Each tree has a QR code that leads to a species profile that was written by one of the students. There's a dedication plaque recognizing the work of that original group of students. We've got seating, a website, support opportunities for folks to get their names as dedications on the trees. So really exciting stuff by 2022. But it gets more exciting. That original area happened to have all native species in it, so we call it the Native Species Collection. But we decided we wanted to do more, and so we decided to make the whole campus the Arboretum, which is 322 acres. So whenever you're on the main part of campus between 501 and 544, you are in the CCU Arboretum. One of the first projects we wanted to undertake in that process of declaring campus an arboretum was a campus-wide tree inventory. So that was something I worked on with several students. They've inventoried 2,577 trees across campus. That inventory is available on our website. That's what the screenshot is in the bottom left of the screen there. Every dot on that map, you can click on it. It'll tell you the species of tree, how big it is. There will be a photograph of the tree, a link to the species profile. It'll tell you how much carbon does that tree sequester in a year, how much will it store in its lifetime if it has a happy, healthy life. All kinds of information, really awesome. And we got accredited at the entry level, which is level 1. Great. Fast forward to 2023. We expanded our programming. We started doing an annual Arbor Day tree giveaway, lots of fitness exercises outside. We had volunteer days. We do art in the Arboretum. We do poetry puns for stress relief activities during finals and things like that, where students come out and write tree-related jokes for fun, and then we share them with each other. We increased our accreditation level to level 2, which is the same as Brook Green, so we feel really good about that. We became recognized as a tree campus by the Arbor Day Foundation, and we further developed our website, which is chock full of information, including ways for folks from off campus to request that we organize programming for them when they come to campus. So if any of you are from off campus and you want to come for a tour or anything like that, check out our website and there's a form you can fill out. And over the past year, we've added more to the campus. We built a community garden. So seasonally, folks from our campus community can sign up for a garden bed. We installed a shady pollinator garden. That one was 100% student-led, so 2 of my students won a grant to do that one. They just finished installing it. The last step this spring will be the signage. We became registered as a bee campus as well, and we launched a really cool internship program called Learning by Leading, where students not only come into the program and learn about arboriculture and horticulture and community engagement in public gardens, but they also gain opportunities for leadership to lead teams of students on special projects. It's a really wonderful program. And so these are my students from last semester. We have some upcoming events. Next week, I'll be giving a talk about the power of trees for climate change and how what we're doing here at the Arboretum contributes to that effort. We will have our annual Arbor Day celebration, which this year is on April 25th. So that is actual Arbor Day. It'll be from 9 to noon in the native species collection next to Wheelwright Auditorium. We'll give away 200 trees. The trees are first come, first served. So if you're interested in getting a free tree or 2, I would recommend trying to get here by 9. They go fast. And follow us on social media for reminders about these and other events that come up, because we'll keep posting about them. All right, there we go. I'll turn it back over to Maeve to introduce our speaker for today.
So I'm really excited to introduce our seminar speaker, Celie Dailey, who is Celie is a botanist. She is currently authoring Black River Flora and Field Guide, cataloging over 350 native plant species and their natural communities for the Butler Conservation Fund, slated for publication in Landscape Photographs, as well as the catalog of floral images from Richard Porcher. Her research contributes to a guide to saving South Carolina's rarest native wildflowers from the mountains to the seashore, currently authored by Porcher, Bradley, McMillan, and Umberg. So I've also had the privilege of going botanizing with Celie. I think we were looking for McBridea caroliniana, the Carolina birds in a nest, which we did not find, but we had a lot of fun, and just spending a day in the field with Celie was like a crash course in so much botanical knowledge, and I'm so excited for her to share that with you all today. So without further ado, Celie, whenever you're ready, come off mute.
Hey everybody, thank you, Maeve. Dominique, the Arboretum looks amazing. I haven't seen any of that. It was great to get a big update. I'm gonna share my screen with y'all here. Let's go full screen. All right. Oh, my screen sharing is paused. I think somebody has to allow me. Oh, there's my front page. Does that look ready, y'all?
Yes. Well, we see this. We don't see it full screen.
Let me just stop my share and start it again. All right. This better go full screen now. All right, there we go. All right, rare plants. I'm going to talk about 11 rare plants and another 5 or so merely fascinating plants. So, you know, the total plants I've documented on the Black River is about 855. So this is just a very small portion of the diversity that's out there. These are the 11 plants, and just so you know what it means to be tracked, these entities are tracked by SCDNR and Fish and Wildlife. Nature Serve gives these rankings, and so anything that's a 3 or lower is gonna be considered rare. So 1 means critically imperiled, a 2 is imperiled, a 3 is vulnerable. You see these rankings for both the global status and the state status of these plants. So just to give you a little background. And like Maeve was saying, I am working on a field guide right now to the Black River that encompasses about 350 species, just the characteristic ones. And then some of these species are going to be covered in Richard Porche's new book that he's working on, that's specifically about protecting the rare plant species of South Carolina. Here's Richard that I've been working with since 2013. John Nelson, who's come out to the Black River sites a few times up from USC. And then the folks that I have worked with, I've worked with the Butler Conservation Fund, but also Open Space Institute to get to go to a bunch of these sites. And I work with the Citadel Herbarium, primarily on this Black River work. And I'm gonna be talking about just 2 sites primarily that I've been to on the Black River, which are the first 2 sites I started surveying. This is the first one for the Black River Cypress Preserve back in 2017. And they have a second property as well. And both these properties are now under the umbrella of Black River Cypress Preserve. And these are the 2 sites, just to give you a little context. One is about 1,000 acres, the Swampside site. The Peninsula Tract is a bit, definitely a bit smaller. And I'll show you these maps again as we go through the plants so you can get an idea of what these habitats are that we're working with. But almost all of these habitats are going to be things that experience a lot of flooding. Almost all of these, even all these pine lands and everything, a lot of them are going to be things that are underwater at some point in time because of the Black River. And so just the context on the Black River a little bit before we get started. Like I was saying, I'm going to show you these Butler conservation sites tonight, which you can see on here: Peninsula Campus, Cypress Preserve. Those are the two sites. But as y'all know, probably there's this whole state park system. This is an old map. I'm sorry. It's definitely gotten a little bit more descriptive since then. But I've been on 8 of these sites from the Hines Canada Tract up in the north down to Rocky Point in the south. So since 2017, I've gotten to see a lot of the Black River. And here's just a beautiful shot of the swamp on the Peninsula Tract. And you can see both how sandy it is and also how black and clear the water is. There's not a lot of sediment and that kind of thing that's gonna make the water really hazy. The sand just keeps everything so clean looking. And then we also have these interesting features along the rivers, these natural levees, and they'll be, some sides of the river are gonna be really elevated like this. Others are gonna be more like the sandbars we saw before, but still you can see just the incredible amount of sand that we have here. And that's really what's holding this bank together, our plants and sand. So, I mean, you know how fragile and breakable this material is. And then a lot of the land looks like this. This is an area that will dry out completely and you can just walk through it sometimes of the year, and then other times of the year it is so pond-like. We have all kinds of little plants growing on. We have, I'm sure, all kind of duckweed and duck meat and that kind of thing growing out here. And so it's pretty amazing all the how wet all these areas are, and then how much they can actually dry out at the same time. So y'all know where you're at, right? We're in the PD. We're on the Black River, which is the southernmost, except for the sand pit. It's right here at the southernmost in the watershed. And we're all in the coastal plain right here. So if you look at this nice map of all the rivers of South Carolina, you can see that the Black barely touches into this, into the fall line area. So here you can see we're like when we're talking about the Black River, we're generally in the outer coastal plain. We're not having this salt influence from the maritime strand where we're at, except at the very mouth, and we're not covering those areas. So that's just generally where we're at. Here's a plant. Here's probably one of the most characteristic plants of the Black River. And this is technically a rare plant because this pond lily with these long narrow leaves like this, it's only in the Black and the Waccamaw, and the range is so limited. They call it endemic to the Black River when it's this highly localized. So it is abundant on the Black River. You see it in the water everywhere. Anywhere there's just like a little bit of still water to the side. You'll see it in the main channel too, but in this like kind of a little bit backwater area, it is just gonna be everywhere, and it's beautiful. It has these yellow lilies floating on the water. And you know, I think because it's so abundant, people don't even realize how special a plant like this is. Even though it looks like there's so much of it, you know, I just want people to know, don't rip out chunks and try to like take this home and plant it. Like, don't do those kind of things, even though you have a plant that looks super abundant. And so people, when I start talking about these plants, I do a lot of work on ethnobotany, and I'm always wanting to know, you know, what these plants are used for. And so I've cut and paste here an excerpt from the book that I'm currently working on, which is a field guide to the Black River. And this is the kind of information that we'll cover in depth in the book, the habitat, a little bit about the ecology if we can, when it's fruiting, when it's flowering. But I also try to cover if there's any ethnobotanical use of the plant. But when you have these rare plants that have such limited ranges, those are not the plants that have a rich history of ethnobotany. It's going to be the more common, widespread plants that we know about people using. And so on a lot of these rare plants, it's interesting though to look at species that are closely related. So Nuphar lutea is the European pond lily. And at one point in time, the Nuphar sagittifolia, before it was recognized as a full species, was actually recognized as a subspecies of Nuphar lutea. And so we know they're generally very closely related and probably were in one evolved, you know, Sagittaria probably evolved from lutea. And we know that the Nuphar species were widely used. And so I try to include this information when I can. But when you get down to it, it's hard to find a plant that wasn't used by somebody at some point in time for something. And so when you start to look at all this information, you know, the more you dig, the more you can find something to tell you about how this plant could be used by humans. And that's just the human use, of course. And so I just wanted to provide a couple links. I'm not going to go into extensive talk about ethnobotany in this talk, but I did just want to touch on it because the first couple plants that I talked to, I have a little bit about the ethnobotany of related species. And so these are just two good indexes that have cataloged together like a lot of other ethnobotanical resources. So these are just two good online databases to use if you're trying to look for some of this folk information. And here's another shot of the pond lily, just beautiful. These are some of Richard's shots. And I've tried to include the date on all of these too, so you can tell what time of year these things are blooming. Okay, so yes, that was the open water. And we're going to take another look at a plant that is in the swamp. And so when you're looking at these maps, you can see the swamp and bottomland hardwoods. All of that is going to readily flood. And then the pine savanna and some of these cutover pine lands also on all these areas flood. Another plant that's found at the open water, but right on the edge, is Enothera riparia. And this is another plant that when you see it, there's so much of it, it's just everywhere. Like up at Rocky Point Community Forest, it is so abundant there, it was just impossible to even get a good count of how many plants are there. But, you know, this is a rare plant. It's exciting to see these plants. I mean, these are ones that I want y'all to know about because when they're in bloom, you can get out on a small boat, kayak or whatever, and you will see these plants. This is a showy yellow flower, just like that pond lily. It's such a showy plant. If you see a Enothera blooming on the water's edge, this is the species. I mean, there's nothing else. It's easily identified because of where it's growing, and it will be growing on stumps and on the bases of trees. And so here's another shot just from a kayak of this plant. You know, it's a little backlit, but you can see the seeds, the seed pods on this plant. are very characteristic. They're kind of ovate, so like wider at the top. So this plant has no flowers on it, but you know, when you start to know what you're looking for, it's impossible not to see it. So here's another one you can see very hidden, but you can see those seed pods in there. And then you can start to discern there's a lot of that plant material back there. And there's the flower, looks like a evening primrose flower. So if you see this flower and it's right on the swamp's edge, that's what it is. And so just a shot of a sandbar. These areas are kind of close to where you'd see the Enothera regaria, but you can just see how the water being in a high stage, how it's gonna move that sand around and reform these sandbars and edges very easily. So the next plant I'm gonna show you, this is generally the habitat for it. It is the Isoetes. So this plant, no flowers, it creates spores. It's a really difficult plant to see. So I'll go back, here's the habitat for it, which this is bottomland, kind of bottomland on the right, more like swamp on the left. All of this area will completely dry out, even the swamp. And then all of this area will also completely flood. And so this little guy can withstand all of that flooding. And what we were seeing before is sort of like an old logging road. There's all of these properties. It's difficult to know what the original communities even were in a lot of these places, but a plant like this, actually, I'm finding it in these more compacted type old roadway areas where they would send out logging trucks and that kind of thing. And so I can't help you too much trying to find this plant. You'll just step right over it. But it's apparently the Southeast is a hotspot for this genus. And I mean, it looks like a tuft of grass, but no, there's gonna be no flowers on it at all. And you can see the habitat on the left, what some of this looks like, somewhere in between swamp and bottomland. I mean, there's some ambiguity in these plant communities. Here you can see on the left a lot of Isoetes, and you can see that it's gonna not just be like in singular plants, but you find like big tufts of it. And how sandy it is. Here's some papers on the Isoetes. Just this is it's very difficult to study this plant because there's not many identifying features. So people are doing DNA work on this. And so this is just some papers about this specific species and this species group. Also in these really wet, waterlogged soil, you will find Sagittaria. Now there's a lot of species of Sagittaria, and this one I believe is a rare species. And here's a little bit more information about the Sagittaria. Like I was saying, we have another similar species with a little bit of ethnobotanical information. And this one, I've only found it on one location on one of the tracks, and it's one of these plants that I would love to go back and check for, and just check more of the species around. You can see how diminutive the leaves are before it's flowering. When it's flowering, all of a sudden you realize you're seeing something weird. And so a lot of these plants are it's so remote. Being out here on the river system, when you're getting away from the main channel, you can see how complicated it is. And you can't even take a little boat into a lot of these places. So, you know, a lot of these swamp areas, I've just waited until the water level was low so that I could walk through. And so for that reason, a lot of these plants may be generally just under documented if they're in difficult to find places. Now this plant, I have not only seen this plant all over the Black River, but I've seen it all over Andrews, just in all kind of ditches. And there are 2 Zephyranthes species, but this is the rare one. It stays a little bit more closed up, and there's another identifying feature too, but this particular one, for some reason, it's just all over the place, and it will be growing not in the swamp, but you can see this is a little up from the edge of the swamp. And just a beautiful plant, and it just comes up so quickly in the spring and then it's gone. There's no plant material left, and it's even doing really well in these areas that were landscaped on the Black River Cypress Preserve. So for whatever reason, the habitat description that I've read is very confusing because it says this plant is more associated with drier type areas. Now the Black River is so sandy that a lot of these areas, even close to the water, they will dry out and need really drought tolerant plants. But this is a plant that I think this probably needs more study. I'm not sure why the habitat description in the field guides that I have are, I don't think people really understand the habitat for this plant. And so we have so much of it in the Black River. It's definitely one that I'm just curious about, and I'd like to, if anybody knows more about this plant, I'd love to talk to you. And yes, like I was saying, it seems to do well in these like kind of disturbed rutteral habitats. I'm finding it a lot in ditches, and I'm finding it in pathways that have been mowed and that kind of thing. I think because it needs some kind of light gap. And there it is again. Actually, the more common species, Zephyranthes adamasco, is going to have a style that is taller than the stamens. And so you can see in this picture actually the style, which is the it's the female part, the 3-parted thing in the middle. That's one of the defining features of this, the rare species. So, you know, when you start to get into all the rare species, you really do need to be using like a botanical text to key this stuff out. And so I am generally referring to Alan Weekly's Flora of the Southeastern United States. That is where all of this identification and habitat information is coming from on the whole. Now this is a tree. This is a tree that I see all over Andrews. It looks a lot like the post oak, but it's not gonna be as strongly cross-shaped as the post oak. And if you look under a microscope on the top of the leaf, you will see hairs. And so it's not super shiny like a post oak. And the swamp post oak can take flooding. So you never see, if you see a tree that looks like a post oak, but it's in an area that you know has experienced some flood, it's probably not a post oak. Quercus stellata is the common post oak. This is Quercus similis, which is the swamp post oak. And I see it on the levee forest. I see it a little bit more in hardwood stands, but like predominantly in the levee forest, which the levee forest has some elevation, but it's right there next to the river and it does flood a few times a year. Here you can see, I just thought I'd point out the levees, which you can see in kind of a green color that go along the main river channel. And those are gonna be those more elevated forests. And those are some of the coolest areas that we have out here on the Black River. Here again is the Quercus similis, and a little bit more about differentiating it. And here is a shot on the Peninsula Tract looking out toward the levee, which you cannot see that the levee is there, but this is so close to the levee and it's totally flooded. And this, when you're driving up here, this area would never flood, but here it is. It's totally underwater. Pine trees underwater. So, you know, just because it's pine trees, don't think you're safe from a flood. Here's another rare plant that's going to be up in that forested area, further away from where you generally have a lot of floods. And so this is just on the Peninsula Tract, we have this area of forest at the top that I'm calling a mixed hardwood forest. It has some attributes of that natural community, but it is rather cut over and replanted with pines, but it's still showing some really interesting diversity of oaks, and we've found like some really neat plants there, like this guy, which is in the milkweed family generally, but it's a vine, and there is a more common species to be aware of, the Gonolobos suberosus, if you're trying to differentiate these. But you can tell if it's in flower, what the plant is, and if you have pods on this plant, if the pods are spiky like this, it's the spiny pod, it's the rare one. And in that same forest area is this plant, which is a herb. It's in the Lamiaceae family, the mint family. It has kind of a fragrant, kind of citrusy smell when you crush the leaves. And it's gonna be the Metalea, the milk vine, and this Collinsonia are both in this area of the Peninsula Tract where we have high calcium forest. And here is a shot of what the habitat looks like this time of year, early February. You can't hardly see any of this plant. It'll just be some green sprouts at this point. And this is that same field which the property owners thought was not very valuable. So they built this Quonset hut here to store stuff. But just behind this Quonset hut is this slope. And this slope and this forest right behind it this is the high calcium site. And there are just so many interesting plants right here. So again, it's going to be this mixed mesic hardwood forest kind of at the north side of this tract. Here's a plant again, a little bit more about it. It's going to be more flowering in the fall. And, you know, not much ethnobotanical information on the Collinsonia in general. It's very sparse. But I did find that it was noted both by Catesby and Michaud. I mean, I think it's just a really striking plant. I don't know. I mean, these flowers are just straight up weird and beautiful. I just don't know any flowers that look like a Collinsonia. And here it is again, a little bit more impoverished looking. And then here are some herbarium specimens. These have not been glued or anything to paper yet. So these were just the straight specimens that I had collected that I was still examining when I was trying to key out this plant. And for some reason, if you know Collinsonia tuberosa, this one that we have on the peninsula, it happens to be very large. It's just very robust. The leaves are big, big, big. And we don't know why this plant is just much larger than it should be. And so that's just one of the fascinating things about plants. So here's another plant in the mint family that we have a lot of. And I found a lot of this plant in different parts of the coastal plain. And so we don't think it's really that rare, because what we found is not only does McBridea persist in the swamp forest, but it is also being found in these rutteral areas between planted pines and the swamp. And so this disturbed habitat associated with pine plantation planting has actually seems to be stimulating this plant in areas where there's not abundant herbicide spray and that kind of thing. But just the manual manipulation of the land, making paths and clearing areas, seems to create these light gaps that a plant like this is really taken advantage of. And so this plant is found all over the place in these pine savanna areas primarily, but all over close to different edges of bottomland type areas. And I did not actually provide a map for y'all that shows the locations of these plants on these properties, which I do have. So I'm sorry to tell you that. I didn't want to include it because with rare plants, we try to keep the actual locations, secret to some degree. That way we don't have people just going out and hunting these plants down. All of y'all are probably fine, but I know they're recording this talk as well. But this is all just to say that the McBridea that we have is one of the most abundant plants that we have between both properties. It's just thousands of stems, many locations across a bunch of different habitats, just continuing to find it the more that we look for it on both of these sites. And so this plant is probably one of the most characteristic plants that we have of this particular river system. And I found it on every site that I visited. Maybe there's one that doesn't have it, but it's incredibly common. And then I found this is not to say we shouldn't protect it though, like now we have, especially at the Black River Cypress Preserve, we have one of the biggest populations known now of this plant that you only find from North Carolina to Georgia. And so, and now we also, this is a pink plant. This is a pink, the flowers are pink with stripes. And what you see on the left here is actually a white flowering variation that has occurred. And I don't know why, but with a population this big, you're gonna have these random genetic things that are happening with the plant. So it's just so neat. And that's really like, if you wanna have a plant and if you wanna conserve a plant, the bigger the population, the more assurance that you have that this plant is going to be able to make it through all kind of different variations of weather and climate that it's going to experience. And this plant, here it is on the right in a bunch of peat moss. And so this peat moss has completely dried out, and you see pine needles. This is up under a pine tree. and the plant doesn't look like it's doing very well, but it's persisting. And when there's a flood, this thing is gonna go crazy. And here you see the plant persisting under all of this weedy growth of these giant blackberry canes. And so what really got this plant going, I think, too, in this area was that they're doing periodic burns. And I don't think the plant is that, it does not need burning, but it is benefiting from the clearing out of the other weedy plants. And so this area was burned that same year, and you can kind of see how it's come back. And the plants have gone through, that's the McBridie on the left, and it's gone through a whole cycle of growth and making seeds, you know, after that burn in February. And you can see just how wet, this is wet pine savanna on the right. I mean, you have this plant, you have pine trees that are occasionally coming down just because it's so wet. You have scirpus, cyperinus. That sedge, you just see it in pretty wet places. Here you can actually see how big the plant is. It's kind of waist over waist high. This is me standing in an area where we have a lot of this plant. And so you can see also why this plant would be under documented. I mean, this is a wet area that's open, so almost full sun here. And, you know, we are in August, so it is hot. So, I think that's another reason we don't think this plant is as rare as once was thought, is just the conditions to get out here and actually document this plant in the middle of summer are just pretty difficult. And so here you can see more kind of habitat where we would find McBridie. This is a road cut between the swamp on the left and a cut over pineland on the right. And these areas are just notoriously diverse. This is where we're going to find the quillwort. We're going to find different eupatoriums in areas like this. And so this kind of the disturbance from a prior road cut, the disturbance from the floodwaters being channeled through here, all of these things help to keep these areas like this open and just create diversity. And here you can see the McBridie hiding along these different zones, from pretty wet to drier, even growing with just right next to sweet gum. And you can see the kind of activity that's happening in this area where we have pine trees falling. You can see how sandy the soil is here, just amazingly sandy. And here's another plant that we're gonna see in a similar habitat, which is a rare Rhynchospora. And it's gonna be very hard to find this in the field because there are so many Rhynchosporas out there, and that's perhaps, you know, perhaps this is underdocumented as well. Here you can see a few different Rhynchosporas that we have. I don't know, we probably have at least a dozen that I've documented. And here are just a couple that look a heck of a lot like the rare species. And so you can see how it'd be very difficult to tell this plant apart from other Rhynchosporas until you took it back to the lab, and you need to look at a specific key, and it will tell you attributes about the nutlet and how to figure this thing out. And so these are the kind of areas where you're going to see a lot of Rhynchosporas. These depression meadows are not really described on my plant community maps because you're going to find them in the wet pine lands. You're going to find these low areas where maybe the soil was dug out, maybe the soil was crushed, maybe a river came through here and, you know, left an indentation, but the main channel shifted. So for whatever reason, you have all these little wet open areas that will be mixed in throughout this environment. And then you'll find all kind of interesting species out here, basically in the middle of nowhere, you know. You can't see these, how wet these little pockets are from a distance. Here's a regular pine land in a wet, you know, pine savanna in the summer, looking really beautiful with solidago, all kind of different things. This was burned just a year prior. You can tell because the sweet gum is not very tall yet, but it's getting there. And so, yeah, you'll have the same conditions. You might find this rare sedge in a place like this, and you might find this rare eupatorium, which we found one of these out here. There's a lot of different eupatorium species, but this is the rare one. And it's going to be in these type of pine savanna type habitats. A lot of these plant communities that we have are now being more converted to these pine savannas through the act of burning, whereas we had a mixture of hardwoods and pines. Now areas are being replanted with longleaf pine and fires are being instituted. So these plant community maps are actively changing through management of these properties. So those are all my rare plants. And here's just a few interesting plants. The reason I had these is because I had noted them as potentially rare. But then doing more research, I found out that, you know, these plants are common, pretty common. They're not going to be the most common, but you'll find them intermittently. And so this is a holly. We actually have Richard Porcher in this picture. It's a deciduous holly, but it's got pretty large leaves. Here are the berries. It's going to be hard to tell this one apart, but it is just one you're going to find in the floodplain. And there's a whole lot of hollies. There's a whole lot of different ilexes. And everybody knows the Ilex vomitoria, the yaupon holly, the black drink. All ilexes are supposedly have caffeine in the leaves, and all of them produce these berries, beautiful red berries in the wintertime, which are awesome. There's a couple that produce darker berries, but awesome for wildlife. Anything that has berries in the winter, I'm just always excited about it because it's such a low food time. Here's the interesting plant that I had they had it at the very beginning of the talk. Just a fascinating plant. You can see here what the Black River is like, how quickly the water can come up, and how plants can still survive. You know, because it's such a small watershed, we get a lot of water and it will be ripping through these areas and changing things. But at the same time, it's so circuitous, it's so small, it's so buffered, that we're still gonna have displays like this, you know. The greenfly orchid, it's all over the place. It's up in tree branches all over the place. If you find a tree that was maybe near the river and has fallen over, you probably will find loads and loads of this epiphytic orchid. So, and it'll be everywhere. It'll be everywhere too. But I found it most on the river itself. Another orchid that we have, not rare at all. I've seen it every habitat where I've thought maybe it would be there, or somebody's told me there is a population. You will find this little orchid. So it's just so diminutive. And this is my last plant that I'll talk about, which there's only one location for it on the Peninsula Tract. So I haven't found it anywhere else on the Black River. It's not supposed to be rare. But I've only found it at one location and it's just incredibly beautiful. It's not in the nursery trade because it's incredibly hard to propagate. But when you see this thing in flower, it's awesome. So here, early May, you have it in flower, and you will find it up in the mesic mixed hardwood. So it's on that high calcium site. It's associated with the milk vine, with the collinsonia. It's in a more mixed like hardwood stand. Here you can see, I've also got its associates, the white oak, the Michoii, witch hazel, red bud, dogwood. All the dogwoods actually are on this site. And so these high calcium sites, like this plant, it's really like the stunner of the Black River, I'd say. And it really, being on these high calcium sites in these like rich wood type areas that are just outside of this regular type flooding, that's where you'll find these richer forests and these rich understory shrubs. So that's about it. There's just a beautiful flower for you. Here it is blooming in October as well. Smaller for whatever reason, but it will bloom twice a year. The herbarium specimens for this plant are just so beautiful. Those white flowers dry this bright yellow color for some reason. Why? I don't know. All right, y'all. I just want to say thank you. And, you know, feel free to send your email or to contact me if you'd like. I put my email in the chat. And there's just a list of the rare plants that we covered, just in case anybody was curious and you missed the notes. There you go.
Thank you so much, Celie. Celie, if you don't mind sticking around for just a minute, we'll do a Q&A, but I just want to give a few upcoming events for our chapter, and then we'll come back to you if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Just a minute.
We can't hear us.
I'm gonna assume. So just some quick upcoming events we want to make everyone aware of. First is that our grant cycle is currently open, but the deadline is coming up fast. So you have until February 10th to apply for grants. These are up to $1,500 and they fund school and community projects. So reach out to us or our grants committee chair if you have any questions about those. We also have one of our first spring events coming up. This is going to be an invasive species removal coinciding with the spring equinox celebration for the Waccamaw Indian people. So we'll be removing invasive species. I think it's a lot of Japanese honeysuckle and privet at the Waccamaw tribal grounds, and that is going to be on March 22nd. So volunteers are welcome to come join us for that. And then save the date, we've got some more invasive species removals coming up. We've had a really good track record of doing events with our two state parks, Myrtle Beach and Huntington. So we're going to be back at Myrtle Beach on March 29th and Huntington on April 12th to continue to steward those areas of the park and make room for native plants to grow where invasive species have been crowding them out. And then save the date for May 3rd, that's going to be our spring plant sale in Conway. And then our next chapter meeting, which will be back in our normal room in the Coastal Science Center, is going to be on March 20th. Brad Fowler is Clemson Extension horticulture agent. He'll be talking about planting tips for spring. And that's it. So you can get in touch with us if you have questions. But what I want to do now is open the floor for any questions for Celie. So Victoria, if you see any on Zoom, let me know, or just raise a hand if you're here.
Yeah, about the Spanish, have you ever noticed any difference in the habitat for the common Spanish and the rare one, where they're found? Or are they both just disturbed sites and everything?
Celie, were you able to hear that?
Can you repeat the plant name?
Yeah, the Savanthus.
Zephyrianthes.
Yeah, the Adamasco lilies.
I have noticed, I have not seen the Adamasca growing naturally in the whole Black River Andrews area. I've only seen it put in with landscaping in Andrews in particular. So, they seem to be a very similar habitat. But according to the literature, that you will find the Zephyrinthes sampsonii in drier type areas, but I've seen it very close. The picture I showed where it was in the landscaping with pine straw, that's the driest area that I've seen it, and that's right next to the swamp edge where it can be readily flooded. So it's not actually in the swamp, but it'll be just right on the edge. Do you have that plan in your area?
Well, our work, we do have some of the common one, obviously planted. And it does well on a dry area or irrigated area, so I'm just not surprised to hear you say you found it in all different kind of environments, basically. But I didn't know if that rare one maybe was showing up in a different type of situation, you know.
Could you hear that?
I'd like to see it in some more, I'd like to see it growing naturally in some locations because I just don't have enough information to be able to tell you that. All I know is there's so much of it on the Black River.
Celie, where can we find your Black River Botanical Guide when it's done?
You're muted.
Oops, sorry y'all. April 1st, the Butler folks will have the first copy in hand, and then we will figure out how long it will take to do the first print run at that point. And so I think the best thing is to contact me, but you should be able to contact the Black River Cypress Preserve once the book is published. So Jonathan Kaiser has been the property manager there for a long time, and I'm sure he'll be around. So yeah, hopefully we'll have it at, I will let y'all know. I will let as many people as I know. I'm trying to make the book so it's generally for the Black River with a focus on the Butler conservation sites. But I am using the list of the 855 species total that I found on the Black River to be able to provide just alternative species when you're looking at a species profile. Say you're looking at one of the eupatoriums, of which there's probably a dozen. I can also provide the other 3 to 5 species that look similar and are found in the same habitat. And so I'm hoping that with a little bit more widespread use of the book being able to be useful across the whole Black River system, we'll have a little bit more opportunity to get the book out there beyond just the Black River Cypress Preserve once it's ready in April. Thank you, Erin. Who's been on many sites with me.
So you mentioned the vine in the milkweed family, and I know that they've found that our native swallowwort, which is it's not Asclepias, but it's in that milkweed family that grows in the salt marsh, can be a host plant for monarchs. Do you know if there's any evidence that that can be a monarch host plant as well?
I think your guess is as good as mine. I haven't specifically looked that up yet. I would guess so. And we do have a lot of Asclepias perennis in the Black River in general. So yeah, somebody tell me who's a monarch expert.
Well, I think we can wrap up there, but just a huge thank you again to Celie. Another round of applause.
Thank y'all so much. I
Thank you
appreciate
to
it.
everyone who joined us tonight and on Zoom.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, y'all.